morning, let's look in on, say, two children at play. Both have a toy figure. One is a comic book superhero, and the other a princess from an animated film. Suddenly, an evil villain appears in their adventure, and the kids face a conundrum. Which character should rescue hostages and bring the villain to justice? My first question is, why don't you work together? But the approaches of these two characters are very different. So it has to be one or the other. Each child believes that their figure should be the one who takes on these challenging tasks. Both characters want justice and know it will take self-sacrifice to bring hope at the end of the adventure. The superhero wants to bring the villain to trial through violence. And the princess wants to appeal to the villain's good side with a magical song that would compel them to stop hurting people. And play on radios for months and months and months. The superhero's approach has a primal appeal, throwing power around through violent retaliation. And the princess's approach is an interpersonal one, using supernatural gifts to give someone a second chance to do better. Which do you think should win out? In contemporary American culture, media and advertisers tell us that in order to have a happy life, we need to be wealthy. And if we cannot be wealthy, then we should have enough followers to make us a social media influencer, which usually ends in some kind of wealth. We have also been shaped by the examples of conflict resolution that require power over another through retaliatory violence. Physical, emotional, mental, and on and on. In television and movies, superheroes and princesses are not real people. And in their worlds, justice often occurs by the wielding of power, either through violence or magic. Typically, neither superhero nor princess is poor or nonviolent. So while this makes an entertaining story, the insidiousness of privilege based on wealth and justice through retaliation is reflected from our current culture back to us all the time. There's no place for God here. So what does all that mean for a follower of Jesus in this culture? This morning, the complexity of God's role in reconciliation is played out in the story of Joseph's encounter with his brothers. These are the siblings who had thrown him in a pit and left him to be sold into slavery. Joseph, of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame, comes face to face with his brothers years after his entrapment and enslavement. He dismisses his servants and speaks with his brothers alone, sobbing uncontrollably. Asking after his father first reveals that his primary concern is for that relationship and not the one with his brothers. It is an intimate moment when Joseph confirms his identity. And it also reveals the ways in which God has made meaning and good from actions that were rooted in sin and tragedy. Human nature being what it is, the brothers do not know what to make of Joseph's behavior. As their shock ebbs away, they are overwhelmed and amazed that this person who they wronged quite thoroughly is not sending them away or executing them. After all, that is likely what they would have done if the roles were reversed. Reconciliation is a process rather than an immediate thing. Joseph tries to make their relationship more equal by dismissing the servants so he can speak freely in Hebrew with his brothers. But he still speaks from a place of power and dominance because of, his station in Pharaoh's household. He tries to show them that what God has done in his life is independent of everything that had happened between them. Now, Joseph can show God's concern for life is for everyone, not just him. None of this works immediately on the brothers. They are simply too unsure of what is happening to trust what Joseph is telling them. Full reconciliation occurs later in Joseph's story, which we don't get to hear today. No matter what part of history we are in, reconciliation is a process and can take many forms. Many people believe that reconciliation requires going back to the way you were, forgetting what happened, and moving forward from there. In a world of violence, reconciliation can only come after an attack and must be desired by both parties if it happens at all. Look at all the peace talks happening right now. Better yet, is there a way to avoid needing to reconcile in the first place? Jesus speaks of a different way of responding when facing violence to the heart, body, or spirit. There is no Christian justification for vengeance and retaliation. While some early Christians were soldiers, it was not encouraged because the Roman religion that was tied to serving in the military was seen as idolatrous. And furthermore, killing another human being was wrong on principle. Jesus taking away Peter's sword at Gethsemane is one of the signs of this. Today's gospel challenges the disciples and us to think beyond the culture of violence in which they lived. Luke is writing to the communities of Gentile Christians in Rome, Greece, and Asia Minor. A question for this community was, could they be both Christians and good citizens of the empire in which they lived? Systems of ethical teaching circulated widely through Greco-Roman and Jewish societies during Jesus' life and the first centuries of early Christian tradition. Luke's theme of discipleship is clear and has Jesus going even beyond the ethical standards of the day. Both then and now, Jesus' instructions about accumulating wealth and possessions and responding to hostility can sound weak or simple. However, when we dig deeper into what Jesus is teaching, there is nothing passive about his strong commitment to nonviolence and his repudiation of using wealth and privilege as power over others. How often in our lives do we feel powerless when we are up against wealth, privilege, and violence? Jesus' teaching is radical because he invites us into a very active and powerful response to those things. As disciples, we are not asked to roll over and accept violence. Instead, Jesus lists the ways we may be attacked and then tells us to actively do something additional, something that those who oppose us do not expect. Nonviolent action directly combats the dark underbelly of materialism and hostility. This has been proven effective in large and small ways. The website stopbullying.gov says that if we are faced with bullying in schools and in public places, being an upstander, someone who intervenes, interrupts, or says something to stop the activity, instead of being a bystander, someone who watches and does nothing, significantly curtails bullying. The life of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu also showed us numerous examples of nonviolent response, especially in his long-standing work of opposing the state-sponsored racism known as apartheid in his native South Africa. Jesus, of course, gives us other examples in our gospel today. An individual making a nonviolent response makes a difference, and a group of people does even more. And this is where our behavior as disciples is key. Both Jesus and Archbishop Tutu teach us to actively counter violence with nonviolence. What would the world look like if we did this as individuals, groups, and communities? People notice how and when we respond to the violence and corruption of the world around us. When we reaffirm our baptismal vows, we say that we will persevere in resisting evil and that we will seek and serve Christ in all people, loving our neighbors as ourselves. This is our call to action. May we follow Jesus now as disciples in this modern world, transforming it with God's help.
Amen.